Poverty causes crime. That's got to be the go-to excuse that shitlibs and black racial activists will make when talking about, and pretty much exclusively when talking about, black failure. And more specifically, the insane amounts of black violent crime that's committed every year. But is that really true? I want to take a look, because this is always, and like I said, pretty much exclusively ever held up as an excuse for black violence. I thought maybe we'll take a look into our not so distant past at a man who is considered to be one of the greatest presidents the United States ever had, Abraham Lincoln. Abe Lincoln was born in 1809. He was named after his grandfather, who had been brutally murdered by Indians. He was born on the frontier in Kentucky. His mother died when he was very young of what they called milk poisoning. She had ingested milk that came from a cow who had eaten a poisonous root. It was a common problem back then. And it took his mother when I believe he was about 8 years old. He would later go on to describe that event as his greatest agony. Abe Lincoln's father abandoned him and his sister Sarah, who I believe was about 9 or 10, to go find a new wife. He left them alone in that log cabin. Needless to say, no heating or air conditioning, no Uber Eats, no Amazon, no nothing, no insulation. They had to forage for their own food, surviving off of berries and what little charity would come from passers-by, but being that they were on the frontier, those were few and far between. Eventually, Abe Lincoln's father did come back with a new wife, who turned out to be a rather good woman. But Abe Lincoln's father was not so nice. Back in those days, it was protected under common law to basically rent your children out for manual labor. And Abe Lincoln's father did this with him all of his childhood and into his early adult life. It was until you're 21. Your parents could do that and keep your wages. So in that way, Abe Lincoln understood a life much more akin to slavery than any black person today can imagine. And that's not even to mention just how hard literally every aspect of life was back then. I mean, compared to that, nobody in the United States today, black or white, has any idea what poor is. Abe Lincoln grew up in a house that did not have any books aside from the Bible and a couple of catechisms, but he had a really strong thirst for learning. He taught himself how to write using a stick that had a burnt end on it and a piece of wood as a slate. He would walk miles to neighboring homesteads to borrow books from them, and he read constantly. And this was much to the chagrin of his father, who would beat him pretty severely for reading too much and working too little for his expense, for his benefit, of course. So all that said, Abe Lincoln went on, as we all know, to become the President of the United States, and somebody that people all over the world today can still cite. You know, I doubt very much that there's a lot of people, say, in France that know about Calvin Coolidge, but they'll know who Abraham Lincoln was. He had quite the mark left on humanity. So, with that said, let's take a look at the black condition in the United States today, where we have Section 8 housing with heating and air conditioning. Everybody has a television, everybody has cell phones, everybody has internet access. And take just one city as an example, Chicago. Really one piece of one city. So the South Side, places like Garfield Park and Inglewood. Those inner city school districts receive, on average, $5.1 billion annually. About $3.1 billion of that goes directly to the schools to fund, the nuts and bolts, buying books, buying computers, buying metal detectors, in their case. And despite that, it turns out that young black children at about the 4th grade level, this is estimated by the National Assessment of Educational Progress, that 54% of black 4th graders cannot read at even a, quote, basic level. And those that do continue on through school, by every metric, exit school with substandard, if not almost non-existent, academic prowess. $5.1 billion for that. Their crime rate is vastly higher than any other racial category in the country, despite all of this tax burden being given to them in the form of food stamps, Section 8 housing, free education, paid for by the greater country's taxes. And yet, as we all know, FBI crime statistics bear out that they are highly overrepresented in virtually every form of violent crime, particularly rape. I mentioned this in one of my previous videos, but the instances of rape in the black community are, as with every other violent crime, vastly disproportionate to any other racial category in this country. Now, I defy one person to make the argument that poverty causes rape. That rape, in other words, because we also have to establish that the poverty causes crime argument has built into it the assumption that these crimes are committed out of necessity or out of survival. So you're stealing food to feed your little brother or something like that. Things that we, I think, saw during the Great Depression. But even then, I guarantee you, if you compared the statistics, it wouldn't come anywhere close to the violent crime in these inner cities. Places like Atlanta, Baltimore, DC, LA County, so on and so forth. But going back to rape, please, as I said before, I defy anyone to explain to me how rape is a crime of survival. You can't do it. No sane person, no person who isn't utterly and completely compromised with progressive bullshit would believe that. Money cannot fix this problem. Money, the argument could be made, is actually making it worse. It's high time that the greater nation stopped trying to prop these communities up, because it's a fool's errand and it will lead to absolutely nowhere.